First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? The second one is,
first of all,
whether they were on
only had a crew of 3
at that time
and
or
if
not.
you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew
the
chiefs
lights reflecting
in
on
the back
the
of the
river.
helicopter to
And
clear
so
each
with
side, as
that,
the pilots only have visibility.
It's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict. But they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, the reportedly, the
first of all, they only had a crew of 3,
400 feet.
And if you're flying a
the,
visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs
they were at the
in
wrong
the back
height.
of the helicopter
So
to
that's
clear
pilot
each
error.
side,
The
as the
first would be a
pilots only have
policy error.
visibility.
Or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them.
First of all, they
if you watch
only
the
had
video,
a crew of 3.
The aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen.
These videos obtained exclusively by CNN show previously unseen angles of the collision between an American Airlines flight and a US Army Black Hawk helicopter. In the first video, the Black Hawk can be seen flying at speed over the Potomac from the left side of the screen. The American Airlines plane can be seen flying towards the airport before the 2 collide, causing a mid-air explosion and fall into the river. In the second video, you can see the Army helicopter and American Airlines plane travel toward each other. After the collision and subsequent explosion, the airliner can be seen spinning into the water, and the Black Hawk is also seen falling into the water.
The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities.
3 different things happen. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? The second one is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict. But they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen.
These videos obtained exclusively by CNN show previously unseen angles of the collision between an American Airlines flight and a US Army Black Hawk helicopter. In the first video, the Black Hawk can be seen flying at speed over the Potomac from the left side of the screen. The American Airlines plane can be seen flying towards the airport before the two collide, causing a mid-air explosion and fall into the river. In a second video, you can see the Army helicopter and American Airlines plane travel toward each other. After the collision and subsequent explosion, the airliner can be seen spinning into the water, and the Black Hawk is also seen falling into the water.
Here in the Comcast.
Hello, I'm Todd Inman. I'm the board member on scene, and we'll be briefing tonight where we're at in the investigation in regard to the CRJ accident with the Sikorsky helicopter. Let me just start with, as usual, our hearts go out to all the families of the victims. In fact, I just spent the last several hours with them before we came here, and I apologize that we had to move this back. But they are one of our primary concerns, along with making sure we get factual information out. They are having it's a hard time for them, obviously. And we want to do everything we can to make sure they get the most accurate information and factual. And has always been at the core of the NTSB mission, our job is to just come out with the probable cause, but then more importantly, make recommendations so that this type of tragedy never occurs again. So today, I know yesterday you saw the chairman, myself, and all the board members here. I just want to let you know they are still actively involved with this. We're just trying to make sure we're dividing and conquering. The chairman and I have had multiple conversations today. She's helped out a lot in making sure we're getting the investigative needs we have. And she's at the command post right now working with some of our people. I'd like to start by just thanking the first responders. When this first happened, a unified command was set up, and we had a lot of important people that came and worked with us. In Virginia, the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue, Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department, Arlington County Fire and Rescue, Arlington County Emergency Management, Arlington Police, Alexandria City Fire, Alexandria Police, Virginia State Police, the NCR Incident Management Team, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, the Virginia Department of Transportation, the Virginia Senator Warner's office, MWA's Fire and Rescue Team, MWA Police. A special shout out to every one of them. MWA has been amazing in helping and working with us, and we're truly appreciative. Along with DC Fire and Rescue, just extraordinary, taking the lead. Prince William Fire and Rescue. In Maryland, the Montgomery Fire and Rescue, Prince George's Fire and Rescue, Charles County Fire and Rescue, Baltimore Fire, Baltimore Police, Anne Arundel Fire Department, Maryland State Police, Maryland Natural Resource Police, MPD, DCFD, and from the federal side, the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, FBI, Secret Service, Customs and Border Patrol, Park Police, DOD, Naval District Washington, American Medical Response, and yes, the U.S. Department of Labor. All of those have been amazing partners and are one of the reasons why that this investigation continues to progress the way we want it to. As I said, we did family briefings last night, and today there are over 100 family members that are now in the area receiving briefings, and as part of a legislative requirement, receiving family assistance. They have been briefed by the medical examiner, the fire chief, NTSB chairman, and myself, along with the family assistant unit from PSA Airlines. In regard to NTSB staff, all staff are now on scene that have been requested, and I want to point out one specific staff member, because we're doing a joint. They will be secured and located, which is in comparison to the CRJ, a little bit smaller. The CRJ is in another distinct area, and we consider a little bit larger. The good news is, based upon the initial mapping, while there are some small aspects of that debris field, there are large chunks that will be easily recoverable, and it will aid in the investigation.
These videos obtained exclusively
When we bring it into the secured facility that will be located here on MWA. That will help us in the close proximity to be able to review and evaluate. Yesterday, we outlined for you a number of groups that have been stood up. A few of them in particular I want to call out, although every one of them have been working very hard for your edification. I want to clarify one thing. There's been a lot of questions and discussion regarding manifest. Let me make this very clear. The NTSB will not and has not released a manifest. We have not in our history, not in our past. We will not be in this accident. In fact, there's specific congressional language that whenever it is in our possession, it is not available through the Freedom of Information Act. It will not be included in our report. We will not be putting any names of any of the victims. Any release of that information will come from other individuals or groups. Regarding the recorders, as many of you saw last night, we recovered from the CRJ 2 separate recorders. One was a FDFR, that is a flight data recorder. FD. That was actually in what we consider good condition. As part of that process, it was soaked in alcohol overnight. It was then opened today, and we have a high level of confidence that we will be able to get a full download in the very near future. Now, once we do have that download, we will not be releasing immediately the information regarding it. We will have to go through, correct the data sets, make sure they're synchronized. This has approximately up to possibly 2,000 data points. Is that right, Bryce? So all of that has to be synchronized and looked at. It's a very laborious practice. It takes a lot of time. Regarding the CRJ's cockpit voice recorder, once it was recovered and opened, we found that it had water intrusion. That is not uncommon. It is not an unusual event for us to receive a recorder with water intrusion. We deal with that all the time. Our recorders division is one of the best in the country, in the world actually, and we have recorders sent everywhere, so there's a step. The CVR was soaked overnight in ionized water, at which point the team put the CVR into a vacuum oven in order to extract moisture. They are still checking electrical connections to determine if they're ready to try a download. It is one step of many steps that we will take in order to get that data, but we have a very high level of confidence that we will have it. We just have to work through a number of steps. Lastly, on recorders, the Sikorsky, where the CRJ has 2 separate recorders, the Sikorsky has a combined cockpit voice recorder and digital flight data receipt recorder. It's in one box. I can report to you now, we have recovered the Sikorsky black box. It is safely at the NTSB headquarters. It will begin an evaluation, just as the other 2 recorders did last night, to determine when and how to take action. I can tell you from a visual inspection, we saw no exterior damage that would indicate that it was compromised at this time. So we have a high level of confidence that we will be able to have a full extraction from that as well. Those are some of the significant updates we have right now. Obviously, we'll be doing some more in the essence of time and making sure our team gets back. I think we're going to be able to take maybe 4 or 5 questions. I'll call on you and I'll repeat it. So we'll try to play that game a little bit, please. Right here.
Thank you very much.
Your name and outlet, please.
Jonathan Kersley from Channel 9 Australia. Captain Sully Sullivan was one of the heroes of the incident on the Hudson that he said we absolutely should be reviewing airspace, not just here but in other places where there's a complex mix of traffic. Is he right? Is there time for a permanent shift in DC and across the country to keep airspace safe and separate between military and civilian aircraft.
So the question for those watching, is it this time now for us to possibly deconflict or change some of the airspace where military aircraft operate with commercial aircraft? I can't give you a definitive answer on that. What I can say is in this incident, it should not have happened. We have in aviation what's called a Swiss cheese approach, wherein if something fails, a backup should catch it. Multiple layers of redundancy. It's been a very long time since we've had a major aviation incident in the United States, and that's the reason why it's one of the safest forms of transportation in the country. But the only way they do that is by investigating what happens now and then making recommendations in the future. Again, the NTSB has done 100,000 aviation investigations. We've issued 15,000 recommendations. Over 84% have been accepted. Once this investigative report comes out, we will be advocating probably for years for changes that need to be made, but we'll not speculate on what needs to be done until we have the facts.
Todd, is there anything obvious?
Hey, I'll call on people. Sorry.
Dave Reverson from Reuters. Can you talk about how long you think it will take to recover the debris, how long you plan to be at site, and have you got any early data yet off the ATC tapes?
I think that was 3 or 4 together. How long the debris will take, how long we'll be on site, and have we gotten any information off of the air traffic control tapes. The debris, we are hopeful once the mapping is done that it will be done in what I will call quick order. I can make no guarantees of that because first and foremost, we need to make every effort and to make sure we're recovering every one of the people that perished in this accident. We'll have some cranes that'll be coming up, and once that happens, you'll see a lot more activity and we'll be moving that in, but I don't want to give you a definitive time. I would say it will start in earnest probably on Sunday, and it will go through next week, and some of that's contingent upon weather and other things. Regarding the ATC tapes, we've received a lot of different information on ATC, and so I'm just going to preempt it. Off-the-shelf software programs are not always as accurate as the data we specifically get from NTSB, from the black boxes. All of that are factors that come into our investigation. So we will not speculate about ATC tapes that you may have heard and seen online or snippets. We are getting the full cooperation that we need to be able to make an accurate assessment and to make sure what we are saying is factual and that it will help and aid in the entire investigation.
Todd, Cooper from Channel 7 in Boston. Is there anything glaring in the videos that we've all seen that would tell you that the pilot in the Black Hawk helicopter made a mistake?
The question is, based on the videos, have we drawn any conclusions? We have not. We know that there was a significant incident in which the 2 aircraft collided, a pretty significant fireball. If you will recall, even after the first day, we only had maybe 1 or 2 grainy images that were coming out. We're seeing more and more at this time. So we're still collecting data, but we are not going to opine until we see a lot of other things in there. A couple more?
2 more?
Yes, sir.
On team with CNN, how critical is it to interview the controller in the tower pad? And how concerning is it to you, the reports that that controller is working 2 positions at the same time?
So the question was, how critical are the air traffic control interviews and basically staffing? So air traffic control interviews are critical. That's the reason why there's a process in place. That began immediately after the accident. It was preservation of that evidence. It was immediately taking down notes, getting logs, all that information. We will go back and look at any air traffic controller that was involved in this. We'll go back and look at their past probably 72 hours, even 2 or 3 weeks. We'll look at their training, their hiring, everything, what they probably ate that day. But it is not one point that tells us everything. It's layered into a lot of other information that's very critical. Regarding staffing, the FAA has had a very robust plan in looking at staffing. Obviously, we'll be looking at not only staffing that day, but progressively staffing. How many people, what job functions they were doing. Were they being combined? Were they not? What was the weather outside? What was the number of landings? I recall back during COVID, one runway was being used, runway 1, that was the only one. 33, as traffic came back, started being opened up. So we would look at changes in traffic patterns, construction at the airport, all of that. It all paints a very big picture. Who are you? Sorry.
Sorry, we are with ATP. Have investigators interviewed air traffic controllers at this point?
The question is, have we interviewed air traffic controllers? Yes. I think I started with...
The helicopter to different things happen. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? The second one is, it is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict, but they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. Things happen. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? The second one is, it is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict, but they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen.
Out front now is Miles O'Brien. And obviously, Miles, you have spent a career covering this industry, covering tragedies in this industry, and you are a pilot yourself.
These videos obtained exclusively by CNN show previously unseen angles of the collision between an American Airlines flight and a US Army Black Hawk helicopter. In the first video, the Black Hawk can be seen flying at speed over the Potomac from the left side of the screen. The American Airlines plane can be seen flying towards the airport before the two collide, causing a mid-air explosion and fall into the river. In a second video, you can see the Army helicopter and American Airlines plane travel toward each other. After the collision and subsequent explosion, the airliner can be seen spinning into the water, and the Black Hawk is also seen falling into the water.
Does your fiance know you're spending this much money?
Is it bad?
$1,000 a month on takeout!
I don't have time to cook.
Why is there $40 on a wine subscription?
No, I thought I canceled that. That was for my ex.
Just download Rocket.
CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel. Elizabeth, let me start with you. An Army pilot who has flown Black Hawk helicopters like you in this area around Reagan National Airport told CNN's reporter Haley Pritsky that the Army's flights are routinely planned down to the tiniest detail. This pilot said that based on the risk, the briefer will approve or disapprove parts of the flight plan. That assessment is then run by the unit's commander, then submitted to the FAA. So if it went through all of those levels, the question, of course, is just how could this have happened?
Well, I believe there's three things that happened. If it had just been one, it wouldn't have been an issue, but three different things happened. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? So I think that was a major issue.
So
as
that's
well
interesting.
As the, yeah, go ahead.
Keep going. So are you saying instead of a crew of 3, it should have been a crew of 4? How many people should have been on the helicopter? And then please continue with your other 2 points.
Yes, so 3 is a minimum crew for a Black Hawk helicopter. In my opinion, when you're going into visual flight mode in a crowded airspace like this, it should be a minimum of 4. So you have a pilot on each side for visibility. That's the first one. The second one is, it is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict, but they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error. Or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen. And it wouldn't have happened.
Cedric, that's one of the most informed explanations I've heard of what possibly went wrong that I've yet. Thank you so much for that. Do you agree with what you had to say?
Yeah, basically I do, Jake. Elizabeth has obviously a wealth of experience with this, and when you look at the way in which the crews are set up for Black Hawk helicopters, that's a critical thing. You know, you've got the mission planning piece that you mentioned, and as Elizabeth was explaining, there are also so many concerns that they have to really look at, including not only the weather and not only air traffic considerations, but also what kind of things they can expect in terms of topographical features and things like that. And that should be a given. But there are things that change sometimes. Sometimes there's new construction and things like that. And so they have to have as much meticulous planning as possible. And if that planning isn't taken into consideration and isn't done in the right way, then of course there could be significant consequences. Not saying that happened here, of course.
Right. We don't know. We're just trying to make informed observations about what possibly happened. Obviously, Elizabeth says that the Black Hawk was supposed to be at 200 feet, and it was actually at 350.
Right.
Is that easy? Is that a mistake that's easy to make to be at 350 when you think you're at 200 feet?
Not normally, because the altimeter, which measures your altitude, is supposed to be calibrated to be exact, and you should never fly an aircraft that doesn't have that kind of an instrument calibrated properly. So that should not happen. If they, for some reason flew at 300 instead of 200, that could be a significant issue, and that could explain why they were flying, where they were flying, and at what altitude they were flying. So it is a significant thing that the NTSB is definitely going to have to look at.
All right, fascinating stuff. Cedric Clayton here and Elizabeth McCormick. Thanks to both of you.
For more on this, I want to bring in CNN's Danny Freeman, who is here with me at Reagan National Airport. And Danny, obviously, anyone who lives in this area has flown inside this airport a million times and understands how busy these runways are. This was actually a huge fight in Congress last year because lawmakers want to always add a direct flight so they can get back home easily on the weekends when they're out of session. But lawmakers from Virginia and from Maryland were expressing a lot of concern about adding more flights to put in this airspace, given how congested it already was.
Yeah, you heard Senator Tim Kaine speak about that a lot, both last night and, of course, today as well, that this has been a concern that he's been talking about for quite some time. And I think you can expect to hear more about that, not only because of the tragedy that happened yesterday, but also because part of our CNN Investigates team, they've been unveiling, or I should say reporting on, near misses, specifically here at Reagan National Airport in the past, that have also specifically happened when it comes to landing around helicopters. According to, again, some of our CNN Investigates teammates, in the past 3 years, at least 2 other pilots have reported near misses, specifically where they had to make evasive maneuvers with passenger planes to avoid hitting helicopters as they were coming in for a landing. So you can expect that piece of information to definitely get more scrutiny and perhaps fuel more fire to this conversation about if there perhaps is too much traffic in general, but also when it comes to these helicopters flying sometimes routine missions around this area.
Yeah, and that was something that stood out to me today from that briefing that we had at the White House, where the new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, was there, and he was essentially saying that he said the pilots on the helicopter were fairly experienced. We know it was 3 members. That's pretty standard for a lot of these training flights, which we thought it was a training flight because it happened at night. He said that this one was a continuity of government flight. We know that we had heard that sometimes they do these where essentially if there was something that had to happen and they had to whisk someone, a senior congressional leader, for example, out of wherever they were in Washington, it would be a flight like this where it would happen. So that's why these helicopters were flying so close to the airspace.
Well, and Caitlin, I mean, we heard from Natasha Bertrand today, also from the Pentagon, saying that these pilots aboard that Black Hawk helicopter had as much as 1,500 hours of experience. So again, to your point, these were not inexperienced people who are behind the controls here, but we're still waiting to see just what went so wrong last night.
Danny Freeman, thank you for that. And also tonight, an Army pilot who has flown a Black Hawk helicopter near the airport describes what that is like. Retired Marine Colonel William Bernard Dunn, a former attack helicopter pilot, is here with me now. And Colonel, thank you for being here. Can you just, as someone who has done this, can you tell us, one, what it's like and how challenging it is to fly over in this airspace?
Thank you. It is very challenging. I've flown Marine Cobras right there at the low-level route around Reagan National Airport, several decades ago. It's very difficult. You're working with air traffic control nonstop, and you're focused completely on ensuring that in my time, you couldn't go above 100 feet above the ground level. And so it's very challenging, but it's very doable.
And so what was the first thought that went through your head when you heard this? Because, we heard a small plane had crashed in the Potomac. That was the initial report. And obviously we got a lot more information. But the minute I heard Black Hawk helicopter, I mean, it was just stunning to hear that it had collided with a passenger plane.
Well, the first thing when I heard the news is I was very confident that we're not going to be any survivors. We've had several mishaps over our years in the military that I've been in, and almost always a midair results in complete fatalities. Sometimes people are able to survive, but rarely. So I was very upset, and I felt for the families of the soldiers as well as all the civilians on the airplane.
Yeah, and as did we, of course, those 3 soldiers who were serving and were on that Black Hawk helicopter. Colonel, thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise with me tonight.
Eagles flight and the Black Hawk helicopter. A warning, these videos are difficult to see as we are also learning more about these 67 lives that were lost in this collision. This morning, the New York Times is reporting that the helicopter may have been flying outside of its approved flight path and higher than it should have been. We'll get much more to that. Let's get to the videos. The first video we want to show you, the bright light that you see at the top is the American Airlines jet as it approached the runway. Then you see the helicopter flying directly into the frame and directly into the plane. Both aircraft immediately then crashing down into the Potomac River. The second video, it appears to be surveillance video from the airport and showing the very same helicopter moving along the river as the plane approaches the runway at DCA, and then the collision and the explosion and into the Potomac River. Horrifying. Both now to the investigation into how what led to that horrific crash. Both of the so-called black boxes have been recovered from the commercial jet, are being examined and analyzed. Those black boxes are going to be key to pinpointing what exactly happened in the moments before the deadly crash. CNN's Renee Marsh is following all of this live from Reagan National Airport. Renee, what is the latest that you're picking up?
Well, let's focus on the victims first. Kate, we can tell you that as of this morning, 14 bodies are still missing, 4 of them still pinned inside of the aircraft, and 2 of the soldiers who were inside of that Black Hawk helicopter have yet to be recovered. We know that recovery efforts will resume soon as sun comes up this morning. Now, we also are expecting the flight manifest with the names of the victims, all of them who were on board the commercial aircraft, to potentially be released today. And we also know that President Donald Trump has plans to meet with some of the victims' families. It is unclear when that meeting will happen. Now, as for the investigation, that is ramping up this morning. You mentioned the black boxes have been recovered from both aircraft, both the airplane as well as the Black Hawk helicopter. The NTSB telling us yesterday that they expect to have a preliminary report with a readout from these black boxes within the next 30 days. Investigators are also waiting for a crane to arrive on this crash site. That crane will be helpful in trying to remove much of this debris. That will be critical in this investigation, as well as the debris will hold clues for investigators. And Kate, this morning we're also learning about staffing in that air traffic control tower. We heard that air traffic control audio in which they warned the pilot of the Black Hawk helicopter about the commercial regional jet. And now CNN has learned that one air traffic controller was actually working 2 different tower positions, directing traffic for both local traffic as well as helicopter traffic. However, this source tells us that that is not out of the norm. Kate?
And Ray, there's also new reporting today about some other recent close calls at DCA. What are you picking up on that?
Right. So what we have learned is just about a day before Wednesday night's deadly incident that there was another flight approaching Reagan National Airport, and it was forced to abort its first landing after a helicopter came close to its path. So concerning information that there was another situation where a helicopter yet again coming close into its path. And I've spoken to several people within the aviation industry yesterday, and they brought up this idea that it is time to ask the question as to whether these military aircraft should be flying in the same airspace along the same path as these commercial aircraft. Of course, as the NTSB wraps up its investigation, which will be many, many months from now, they will make recommendations that will essentially change aviation safety for years to come, to essentially make sure that this sort of thing does not happen again. But certainly people paying a lot of attention as to whether these military aircraft should be flying in the same airspace as these commercial aircraft around this airport. Kate?
Renee, thank you very much. John?
And as Kate was mentioning, there is also new information this morning on the Army Black Hawk helicopter in the crash. Sources tell the New York Times it appears to have been too high and out of its approved flight path. There's some new information on the pilots of the helicopter as well. Let's get right to CNN's Natasha Bertrand at the Pentagon. Natasha, what's the latest from there this morning?
Well, John, we're still trying to sort through all of the information that we're getting about this Black Hawk, and the Department of Defense, of course, is doing the same. It's interesting that the New York Times reported that this was a helicopter that was flying at above 300 feet because the helicopters that are training as part of these missions with these Black Hawks, they're supposed to be under 200 feet. And in fact, CNN has reported that the last reading that this helicopter gave and provided to these flight radars and flight trackers was that it was at 200 feet at the time of the collision. So either that was incorrect or something else went wrong here, but that is going to be part of the investigation as well. Now, we know still that the helicopter was on what has been described to us as a pretty routine training mission. This is something that the pilots would have been experienced with because, as we reported, the pilot and the co-pilot, they've had between them about 1,500 hours of flight hours. And so they were not junior pilots. This is not something that they would have been unfamiliar with. However, Pete Hegseth, who is the Secretary of Defense, he did acknowledge yesterday that a, quote, mistake was made and that there may have been an elevation issue. Now, the Times is also reporting that the flight of the helicopter may actually have deviated a bit from its flight path. There are very specific predetermined flight routes that these helicopters are supposed to be taking. And it's our understanding that this helicopter did shift from what is known as flight path 1 to flight path 4, which may account for why it was making those maneuvers at that time. But still, so many questions to be left answered here, including, for example, were they wearing night vision goggles, which may have something to do with their vision being impaired, as President Trump suggested yesterday. So all of these questions have yet to be answered, and I know members of Congress have similar questions. Senator Tammy Duckworth, she also told Jake Tapper yesterday that in her briefing from the FAA, you know, there were more questions about whether this helicopter was on the appropriate flight path. And as Renee mentioned as well, we are still waiting for these two other crew members from this helicopter to be recovered. So far, only one has been, John.
All right, Natasha Bertrand at the Pentagon, raising so many questions. Any one of these slight deviations certainly could have contributed to this disaster, but that is why an investigation is underway.
Recovery efforts are going to be intensifying in the Potomac River this morning as divers continue the search for the remaining victims of this tragic collision. The teams are facing significant challenges underwater in near zero visibility, even though the twisted fuselage rests in just a few feet of water.
The mud becomes an intense problem. The severe lack of visibility means that they are going through an aircraft in braille. And while we're going through an aircraft fuselage, it is torn apart. So every foot, every 6 inches that you move, there's a potential of another snag, some potential injury for the divers.
And joining us now is retired Navy captain and Navy diver Bobby Scully. Bobby, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I just have to say, imagining the horrific scenes that many of these divers are going to be encountering is very, very difficult to think about. And I am just struck by how much we owe our first responders because the things that they do for us in the wakes of these tragedies is just phenomenal. And I'm hoping that you can kind of take us inside and help us understand what it is like in a situation like this, especially when you are also facing incredibly adverse conditions, freezing water, that makes it even harder to do this really, really difficult job.
It is. It's a very difficult job, Casey. Thanks for having me on board. This is one of the hardest jobs that I think divers end up doing. And unfortunately, we get called upon to do this more than we like to think. It's hard, rigorous work to do. You heard in your previous piece that, you know, it's cold, it's dark, it's a lot of hazards with the twisted metal and the aviation wire and that sort of stuff. So physically, it's a hard job. Emotionally, it's a hard job too. For a lot of divers, you're just in the mission and you try not to think about the mental aspects of the job. and you put that on hold until after the mission is done. I think a lot of us would say that, we don't think about that until much, much later, but that is something that comes into play, and leadership has to deal with that and make sure that their divers are taking care of. All their first responders obviously have to be aware of that and take care of those aspects. The weather that's coming in, of course, is going to make this job even tougher physically, and it's just something that we really need to give our first responders and our divers a lot of credit for.
Three different things happen. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? The second one is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict, but they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen.
Divers are back in those icy waters today in the Potomac River, trying to recover the wreckage from the American Airlines jet and the Army helicopter, both colliding, killing everyone on board the 2 different aircrafts.
And we're learning more today about the 67 people who lost their lives in this disaster, as they are now being identified. Local 10's Ben Kennedy starts our team coverage off. He is live near the crash site in Arlington, Virginia, with the latest on what went wrong in the skies. Ben.
Alexis, Christie, it has been a rainy afternoon here in Arlington, Virginia. Just outside the crash site, crews are working through this cold, wet weather to find out what happened. But first, we want to show you new video obtained by CNN, and we do want to warn you that it might be hard to watch. This new angle is from Wednesday night's crash. You can see the passenger jet and the military helicopter fly towards each other, collide, then explode as pieces of both aircraft fall into the Potomac River. It is video like this that could play a key part in the investigation to find out why this took place. Under heavy rain, divers today returning to the wreckage of the waters of the Potomac, working with the NTSB. They will help locate more bodies, more parts of the aircraft, and more clues. The black box is the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder from the American Airlines plane, seen here, transported in the same water they were pulled from to preserve the integrity of the recording, now in the NTSB lab for evaluation.
We're starting the process of not only opening those up, but to begin the extraction of the data.
Wednesday, American Airlines Flight 5342 flying towards Reagan National Airport runway 33 with just 2,400 more feet left to go. The Army Black Hawk helicopter approaching from the other side of the Potomac River when the Black Hawk slammed into the American Airlines plane, both aircraft falling into the icy water below. In early focus for the investigation, the flight path and altitude of the helicopter. Preliminary data shows it was flying at about 350 feet when it should have been under 200. One expert says early indications suggest the helicopter pilots may have been looking at the wrong plane when they told the tower they saw the American jet.
When you're required to maintain visual separation, once you acknowledge or ask for visual separation, then the controller kind of relaxes a little bit because he thinks, well, that aircraft sees the other one.
There were 64 passengers and crew on the American Airlines flight and 3 soldiers on the Black Hawk helicopter. No one survived. President Trump once again weighed on a possible cause of the crash, posting to Truth Social this morning the Black Hawk helicopter was flying too high by a lot. It was far above the 200-foot limit. That's not really too complicated to understand, is it? The NTSB reiterating the investigation has just begun, starting with the critical data recovered from those black boxes.
The data recorder itself has thousands of data points, and they all have to be synchronized against a lot of other things that happened in the plane. The voice recorders actually have to be what's called auditioned among a number of people so that there's complete agreement of how the transcript will come out. And we also look for ancillary noises, maybe a boom or a thud or a crack or something in the cockpit. So those things are going on concurrently, along with the fact we have several hundred people in the field looking at every other aspect of this investigation.
And we want to show you the new video obtained by CNN one more time. Again, this is from a different angle from Wednesday night's crash. The passenger jet and military helicopter flying towards each other, colliding, and then exploding as pieces of both aircraft fall into the Potomac River. American Airlines did announce today they will retire flight number 5342, which is standard action in the wake of a major aviation disaster incident. Back live to Reagan National Airport this afternoon. Runway 33, where that plane was supposed to land, is also shut down today. Alexis, Christie?
Okay, so in response, because of this collision, what kind of changes are happening in and around the airport right now?
Well, Chris.
In the air. Steve Keeley, can you hear us?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. All right, so you're not going to believe this debris field keeps getting wider. So I parked at the McDonald's, as I told you earlier, Jason, at the Boulevard and Cottman Avenue, which is across the boulevard from the plane crash site. 2 officers tell me here is an air tank from the airplane, and the air tank has a number 10 on it with jet rescue label on it. So I said how it was a medical jet with 2 doctors, 2 pilots, a patient, and a family member, a commander had told me, and that was confirmed by another officer. This would be on a medical plane, an air tank, an oxygen tank that is right on the corner where the McDonald's is, across all 12 lanes of Cottman Avenue, and that's how big the debris field is. I just talked to Sergeant Eric Kripp. I said, any estimated time of revival on the police news conference? He says, we might have to keep moving it back because we keep finding stuff from the plane. So I'm standing here with this air tank now that hasn't been roped off yet. And I don't know if it was kicked down here or it's down. It's across all 12 lanes of the boulevard. It may have been hit by vehicles and ended up here. But they keep moving the scene back. They have closed the boulevard. It was not closed right after this when I was on scene. But this air tank is here. And I'll get a picture in so you can see it. And it's just shocking how much they keep finding. Now, it's dark out, it's been raining, and there's been smoke billowing all the time. I just walked 2 miles to get around everything safely to get to where they're going to have the media news conference, which is at the gas station across the 12 lanes of Boulevard. But they keep finding things, so they may move the media back before they start talking. So I'm going to head back over there. I'll get you a picture where this air tank is. It looks like Philly police are coming over.
And welcome back here to Live now.
But what an awful scene this is. And still, I have not gotten any information on potential victims on the ground. This was a crowded mall. It was a packed Cottman Avenue waiting for the traffic light at the boulevard. And I know firsthand because I was in it moments before and moments after on both sides. So there's your update. I'm going to go back over the scene. I'll get right back to you, and we expect to hear from, I know Police Commissioner Kevin Bethel just arrived. We'll hear from police, and we'll learn what they know at this early juncture still. As you hear sirens, fire department, ambulances leaving, and it's also a gruesome scene. I was warned at one point. Everybody was moving me back to be for our safety and other things. It's just awful scene. And their police and the fire department doesn't even know the extent of everything that happened just yet, because Cottman Avenue is one of the busiest streets in Philadelphia, along with Roosevelt Boulevard, at the busiest time of day, evening rush hour on a Friday.
All right, Steve Keeley, get to safety, and as soon as you have more information, we will check back in with you. You are doing an awesome job out there.
And I was going to ask Steve about injuries. He obviously has no information on that, but I mean, objective one for first responders is to find anybody on the ground who needs medical attention. And I don't know if you can hear me, Steve, but have you seen any patients being loaded onto gurneys, people being scooped up by ambulance or police officers in need of medical attention, anything like that? Okay, I think he took off. It's very fluid for him.
Right.
We're trying to get him back on the phone. When we do that, we can. But as you mentioned earlier, Dawn, Governor Josh Shapiro is the one who really helped shed some light on this plane. The occupants, the 6 people on board a medical flight. The governor also saying that the plane crashed about 30 seconds after it took off, leading to this scene that we see here right near Roosevelt Mall in the parking lot, into stores, into homes, fire crews trying to put out those fires. And in these 2 live shots, the one on the right is live. I believe the one on the left is not. But there may very well still be fires burning as crews try to shut off gas lines that are underground that were disturbed by this plane that fell from the sky.
Right. This, if you're just joining us right now, this all happened shortly after 6 o'clock tonight. We're hearing that a Lear 55 with 6 people on board, 2 patients, or I should say 2 doctors, 2 pilots, a patient, and a family member on this plane that just took a nosedive into the street. We're told that Roosevelt Boulevard from Steve Keeley is currently closed. He's hearing from top police officials. He's been in the thick of this all night long. We're hearing that it is a gruesome scene. He's been warned it's just awful. We don't know the extent of any injuries on the ground just yet. He is waiting to hear more from police. They're setting up a command center, so we don't know the extent of any potential victims on the ground. But you know, as you look at this video, you can see the massive response. The video on the left showing the fire burning after this plane crashed into the ground. And I thought it was interesting, as Steve pointed out, Jason, that where he was at this gas station across 12 lanes of Cottman Avenue, that
Need
they
to open
found
the
an
door to
air tank
more
and
home
oxygen
buyers?
tank
Hyper-target
with
home buyers in
jet
your area
rescue
down to
on
the
it,
zip.
presumably,
Learn how
medical
Flex data-driven
equipment
ad solutions
that
can
was on that plane that somehow ended up, whether it was hit by a car or that's, you know, flying through the sky, landed in this gas station parking lot.
Yeah, and I think what is just blowing people away is just the idea of the angle that this plane came down. I mean, almost straight from the sky. And there are several other videos on social media as well that we will share with you when we can, but that just show different angles of just how this plane fell from the sky 30 seconds after takeoff, reportedly by the governor. And then the fireball so bright that even this camera shot on the left from the Ring doorbell and many others, just you lose sight of everything. That's how quickly and how bright it happened. The debris field, they haven't even been able to cordon it all off yet because Steve is walking around in what may be evidence. And you think about what the job the NTSB is going to have here, and they're already spread thin enough in the Potomac from a mid-air crash 2 days ago. And now they're going to have to respond to this scene in a very, very busy section of Philadelphia, maybe the busiest outside Center City and some other areas, but Northeast Philly and the Boulevard and Cottman, and now you're talking about tanks from a plane that just crashed. But again, objective one, priority one, how is everybody doing on the ground?
Right.
Some of the folks in their row homes, in their cars, in restaurants, in some of those
Right, this was rush
businesses.
hour. People were, it's a Friday night, it's rush hour. People were headed home from work. They might have been headed out for the evening, and this happened. And Fred Teesey was talking about could be potentially icing on the plane or whatever. So let's head over to Drew Anderson. Drew, you can talk a little bit about the weather conditions when this happened and potentially what the pilots were up against.
So here's what I'm doing. I've been piecing together all the data that's coming into our newsroom. So you guys were mentioning how the plane potentially crashed about 30 seconds off of takeoff. So I went to FlightAware and was looking up some of the information that Learjet we were talking about. And the estimates are it only got about a half a mile off the ground. So from that information, we wanted to see, okay, is it icy at that level up in the sky? Because it's pretty mild when you step outside right now. And ice, as it collects on wings, can change pretty much the way a plane is designed to fly, such that it can't maintain its altitude and it comes down because it's just can't handle that extra weight on the wings. From what I see from the weather data, as I was looking in the upper atmosphere, it is not icy right now a half a mile off the ground. You have to go about a mile or more off the ground before you're going to get temperatures below freezing. So from what I can see from the information coming in terms of the max height that the plane got versus what temperatures would be at that level, it does not look like ice is a factor that would have played a role in any whatsoever. But again, we're still waiting to get more information in to confirm those things. But from what I see, it's mild air where the plane made it and temperatures were above freezing. And when I'm looking right now on the live picture of our Philadelphia Skycam city line and just kind of look at the city sky, the clouds are really low. So the plane for sure would have been in visibility that would not have been existent. They would just been in clouds, not able to see. So that's something to keep in mind. But from what you guys were saying, I could just say ice would not have played a factor from the weather data that I'm seeing coming in at the Fox 29 Weather Authority Weather Center.
Okay, Drew, thanks. We just got some breaking details. We have a statement from the FAA, and I'll just read it to you in its entirety. A Learjet 55 crashed around 6:30 p.m. local time on Friday, January 31st, after departing from Northeast Philadelphia Airport. 2 people were on board. The plane was en route to Springfield Branson National Airport in Missouri. The FAA and NTSB will investigate. The NTSB will lead the investigation and will provide all updates. So the governor earlier had said 6 people were on board. The FAA now saying 2 people were on board. But now, Dawn, we know that this plane that took off from Northeast Philly Airport was headed to Missouri, Springfield Branson National Airport. So that's what we can tell you from the FAA, an official statement. And now the NTSB will be making its way up. And again, it's just still so shocking that this happened in Northeast Philly. And now, again, a rescue effort underway for the folks on the ground who may have been hurt by this terrible disaster.
Right, and the FAA is saying, of course, that this information is preliminary. It is subject to change as we learn more information. Governor Josh Shapiro also in contact with the mayor of Philadelphia, with the police chief, with the fire chief, trying to offer any and all assistance he can as the city tries to deal with this crisis, with this tragedy. As you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, this is what happened. You can see that fireball after this plane, this Lear 55, just took a nosedive out of the sky, and it took off about 6:30 tonight, and 30 seconds later was crashing into the Philadelphia streets. And we have learned, as you mentioned, Jason, initially we thought there were 6 people on board, but according to the FAA, it's now saying that 2 people were on board that plane.
Steve Keeley, I don't know if you can pull up Steve Keeley's latest tweet, but he has a picture of the oxygen tank, the medical oxygen tank that he was describing to us on the air. He is right on the boulevard somewhere just outside the Roosevelt Mall, and he said across the 12 lanes of the boulevard, he saw a jet rescue oxygen tank on the side of the road. Right next to a McDonald's, and as soon as we will bring you that when we can. It's just an incredible debris scene and a debris field. Steve Keeley also, there it is. That's what Steve saw. I think that's on a sidewalk, right outside the boulevard.
Right.
Not sure if it was hit by cars or just incredible that is intact.
Yeah, he said, Steve tweeting that the oxygen tank from the jet was outside the McDonald's at Cottman Avenue and Roosevelt Boulevard. That's about a quarter mile at least from where Steve Keeley was earlier when he was reporting near those fires. Right. So that is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and I'm just estimating if that's a quarter mile away, you got to think the debris field is even larger than that, maybe a half a mile at least. But one police commander telling Steve there's pieces everywhere. And when you talk about a plane that falls out of the sky, it's not a surprise at just how widespread the debris field is there. And now we turn our attention to the ground and the folks there and the innocent people on the ground driving and shopping and eating. And it's just way too soon to tell. And we'll certainly be checking in with hospitals, checking in with the community there to try to figure out if everybody's okay on the ground.
Right. And Philadelphia.